In a developing story that has captured widespread attention across the Southwest, reports are emerging about a remarkable act of restraint, integrity, and unexpected cultural bridge building involving a quiet, unassuming cowboy named Samuel "Sam" Hartley. According to early accounts collected from longtime residents, tribal historians, and individuals close to the Apache community, the incident that would later reshape his destiny began more than 13 years ago during what many described as a brutally dry summer, when both ranchers and tribal communities were grappling with dwindling water sources and struggling grazing land. Sam, a man known for keeping to himself and rarely offering more words than necessary, had been riding near the border of the White Mesa Apache lands, searching for missing cattle and checking for signs of encroaching predators. The land in that region is notoriously rugged, shaped by generations of wind-carved sandstone and ribbons of sagebrush, with narrow washes that come alive only when seasonal rains briefly return. What happened that afternoon, according to Sam's own later account to a local reporter, began as nothing more than a routine inspection of the outer canyon ridge where his cattle often wandered. His horse stumbled slightly near an uneven patch of earth, causing Sam to dismount to inspect the ground. It was there, in the middle of a shallow wash, half hidden by sun-bleached stones, that he noticed something glinting beneath a thin layer of dust. At first, he assumed it was just quartz or bits of broken glass from hikers passing through, but after brushing away more of the sediment, he uncovered what appeared to be several small nuggets of gold, raw, unprocessed, and unmistakably genuine. The discovery might have prompted most individuals to celebrate, or at least collect what they had found before reporting it to authorities, but Sam said the moment was instead marked by a strange sense of discomfort. Multiple sources close to him recalled that he often spoke with an unusual reverence for the land, especially the sections he knew belonged to the Apache people, who had stewarded that territory long before any rancher claimed adjoining parcels. The glint of gold did not thrill him. Instead, he felt the weight of what it might mean. Gold has always had the potential to disrupt harmony, attract outsiders, or trigger disputes over property rights, cultural preservation, and land sovereignty. Sam understood enough about local history to recognize this exact stretch of land had been part of Apache territory for generations, protected not only by legal boundaries, but by cultural significance that outsiders frequently overlooked or undervalued. When Sam gathered the nuggets into his hands, he reportedly felt a strong conviction that the gold wasn't his to take. There was a visible Apache marker, a simple stone formation, about 20 feet from where he stood, one he had seen before, but never disturbed. That marker, as later confirmed by a tribal historian, indeed signified a culturally sensitive zone, an area used in earlier decades for ceremonial passages and family gatherings. That knowledge strengthened Sam's unease. He knew that removing anything from land that was not his could be perceived as disrespectful, or worse, as an act of theft. And so after holding the gold for only a few seconds, he set every piece back into the shallow depression in the ground, brushed soil over the top, and stood quietly, contemplating his next steps. Rather than riding away and allowing temptation to return later, Sam rode directly to the White Mesa.
The years that followed that scorching afternoon in the desert unfolded quietly for Michael Tate, the cowboy who once stood over a vein of gold dense enough to change a man's fate, but not strong enough to shake his principles. He did not speak of the discovery, not even to the coyotes and wind that kept him company on isolated rides. Instead, he packed away the memory like an old letter he would never reread, something meant to be carried, not acted upon. The mountains had whispered, "Leave it," and the voice of the elder had echoed the same. Sometimes Michael wondered if it had been his conscience or something deeper that guided him that day, but he didn't scrutinize the choice. A man didn't need to analyze his integrity, he simply needed to maintain it. The ranch itself had begun a slow decline, not enough to break him, but enough to remind him daily of what he had given up. The soil wasn't as generous as it once was. Summers dragged longer, water grew scarce, and equipment grew older faster than he could afford to replace it. There were nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams he'd nailed in place with his father years ago, worrying about how he would keep everything running. Yet even during the toughest months, he never regretted leaving that gold untouched. Some treasures belonged to the earth, and some choices defined the man. The people in town knew Michael as steady, courteous, and perhaps a little lonely, though he never complained. He had acquaintances, but no real circle, the kind of man who preferred sunrise over conversation and felt more at ease with a horse than with a room of men trying to make fast money or faster judgments. Every so often, his mind drifted back to the elder he'd met that day. Tall, quiet, resolute, with eyes that carried the weight of centuries. Michael sometimes wondered if the elder had spoken to others about him, or if the encounter had evaporated from the man's memory the moment Michael rode away. 13 years is long enough for deserts to shift, for tribes to grow and shrink, for men's fortunes to rise and fall. For Michael, it was long enough to experience both small triumphs and quiet failures. A stubborn mare won him a regional rodeo prize. A harsh winter cost him half his cattle. A drought nearly closed the ranch for good. His life weathered these changes much like the rugged land around him, cut by hardship, but never broken. Then one December afternoon, as a pale sun battled the cold and cast long, thin shadows across the ranch, Michael noticed a dust cloud approaching on the only road leading to his property. He wasn't expecting company. He tightened his coat, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked toward the gate. As the dust settled, he could make out a row of vehicles. Trucks, not government-marked, but sturdy and clean. And standing beside them were several people dressed in formal attire with details unmistakably tied to the Apache Nation. Michael's heartbeat quickened. It wasn't fear, just the sense that something from his past had caught up to him in a way he could never have predicted. A younger man stepped forward first, offering a respectful nod. "Mr. Tate, my name is Daniel Nez. I'm here on behalf of the Tribal Council. May we speak with you?" Michael blinked, surprised but composed. "Of course," he said, unlocking the gate. "Didn't know I was expecting company from so far out." Daniel smiled softly, though there was gravity in his expression. "It's been a long time coming." They followed Michael to his porch, where he offered coffee, and the group accepted it with a politeness he appreciated. There was something ceremonial about the atmosphere, as though this was not a casual visit, but the unfolding of a purpose they had carried with solemn responsibility. After a few sips, Daniel finally spoke. 13 years ago, you met one of our elders, Hollow Oak. He passed on
In the weeks that followed the discovery, the story of the cowboy who refused to take gold that wasn't rightfully his began to drift quietly through ranch towns, tribal communities, and the far stretches of desert where word of mouth traveled slower but more faithfully than any newspaper. It wasn't a story anyone celebrated loudly at first. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't scandalous. It was something rarer, an act of integrity at a time when most people were counting what they could keep instead of what they could give. And yet, even as life resumed its familiar rhythm for him, something subtle began to shift, as though the land itself remembered what he had done, storing his choice the way the desert stores water, quietly, sparingly, but never forgetting. He didn't expect acknowledgement. In truth, he barely thought about it. His decision had been instinctive, shaped by principles he never wrote down, never boasted about. He continued tending cattle, mending fences, riding long circles around the edges of his land, and waking before the sun because the work demanded it. What stayed with him wasn't the gold he hadn't kept, but the meeting with the tribal elders and the look in their eyes, an expression that carried the solemn gravity of people who understood the weight of history. He had felt humbled by it, almost unworthy of the depth of their gratitude. As far as he was concerned, he'd done nothing exceptional. He'd simply done the decent thing. But decency, in a region marked by generations of conflict, broken treaties, land disputes, and misunderstandings, was never small, and the tribe understood this better than anyone. Years drifted by. Seasons changed the way they always did. Rains that came too little or too much, summers that baked the earth into cracked patterns, winters that pushed cold wind through cottonwood trees until they hummed like distant flutes. The cowboy aged quietly, the lines around his eyes deepening from sun and wind, not worry. His knees grew stiff, not from regret, but from years of riding and hauling and doing the kind of work that built character in the muscles as much as in the soul. He never married, though he'd loved once. He never grew wealthy, though he worked hard enough to earn it. He never sought recognition, though he'd earned more than a lifetime's worth. His legacy was simple: kindness where it mattered most. What he didn't know was that the story of his choice had not faded. It had grown roots. For the Apache community, his refusal to take what was sacred was not just a respectful gesture. It was a restoration of trust in a world where trust had been taken from them more times than history cared to record. Elders told the story at gatherings, not as a warning or a lesson, but as an example that goodness still existed beyond tribal lines. Children grew up hearing his name spoken with a level of respect most outsiders never received. And when the boy who had guided him to the elders became a man, he carried that story like a compass, shaping how he approached leadership within his community. 13 years can pass slowly or all at once, depending on whether a person is waiting for something. The cowboy wasn't waiting, but the tribe was watching, quietly, patiently, with a sense of timing that followed tradition rather than clocks. To repay a gift too early would make it transactional. To repay it insincerely would cheapen it. To repay it without meaning would dishonor both sides. They waited for the right moment, and when it arrived, it did so in the most unassuming way possible, through an unexpected knock on the cow.
In the years following the cowboy's quiet act of integrity, the land he had once stood upon transformed in ways he could never have predicted. What had been a rugged, wind-swept expanse of scrub brush and sandstone mesas became the center of a painstaking restoration project led by the Apache Tribal Council. It was not a development in the conventional sense, but rather a reclamation of history and heritage. The tribe dedicated years to protecting ancestral territory, mapping sacred trails, reviving ceremonies that had nearly disappeared, and reintroducing native plants that had not grown there for generations. The land healed slowly, like a body learning again how to breathe. They often spoke of the unknown cowboy, the one who had found the gold and chosen not to take it. His integrity was passed from one generation to the next, not through official reports or legal documents, but through the powerful current of oral tradition, where truth was weighed not by paper, but by character. The story took on a near-legendary quality. Children heard it around evening fires. Elders referenced it when discussing the importance of protecting what belongs to the earth rather than exploiting it. The cowboy might have never known that he had unintentionally woven himself into the tribe's history, but the respect for him grew quietly, year after year. 13 years later, the tribe decided it was time to act on something they had long held in their hearts. They believed that good deeds, especially those done in silence, had spiritual weight, and they felt a responsibility to return what had been given, not gold, not wealth, but honor. They set out to find him, though they had only fragments of information. A sheriff who vaguely remembered the man, a supply store owner who had once sold him rope and tobacco, a rancher who had ridden with him during a cattle drive.
piece by piece, the tribe traced the path he had once walked, crossing through old mining towns, dusty roads, and fading communities that had been swallowed by time. Eventually, one of the younger council members located him several hundred miles away, living a simple and increasingly fragile life. The cowboy had aged in the way hardworking men often do. His back had bent slightly from years of riding and land labor, his hands bore the deep etchings of toil, and his once sharp stride had slowed to a steady shuffle. He lived alone in a small cabin that sat beside an open field, the kind that turned gold in the late afternoon sun. He had no luxuries and asked for none. His horse was gone, his neighbors were few, and his most valuable possessions were letters from friends who had long since passed away. He had lived honestly, if not prosperously, and in his heart he felt that was enough. When representatives from the Apache tribe arrived at his home, he was hesitant but polite, unsure why anyone would travel so far to speak with him. He could not imagine he had done anything noteworthy, much less something someone might remember over a decade later. The council members explained the reason for their visit with the patience and solemnity that reflected the weight of the moment. They told him that what he had done for their land was something rare, something honorable, and something their people did not take lightly. They explained how the untouched gold had allowed them to protect the territory and reclaim.
In the years that followed, the memory of that quiet morning on the reservation remained etched into every step the cowboy took, no matter how far he wandered from the sun-baked ridges or the whispering cottonwoods. He had long accepted that he was simply a footnote in the history of a land older than any map, that his small act, leaving the gold untouched where it lay, was just a moment of decency stitched into a life made of dust, work, and silence. He never once imagined that anyone remembered, and so he lived as though no reward would ever come, keeping to the same humble rhythm he had always known, rising before the sun, sleeping under the quiet roof of his cabin, and giving more than he ever took. As age began settling deeper into his bones, the cowboy found himself slowing in ways he did not speak about. His knees, once hard as iron, protested every time he stooped to mend a fence. His eyes, once sharp enough to spot a straight calf from across a pasture, began blurring on him in the late afternoon. But he carried on, because men like him did not know anything else. Pride did not drive him, necessity did. He had no wife, no children, no one to depend on but himself. And while loneliness crept in like an old familiar wind, he never complained. Life had been good to him where it mattered. He had land beneath him, he had a sky over him, and he had peace inside him. One late autumn evening, after gathering the last of the straying cattle before the real cold set in, he sat beside the small stove in his cabin, rubbing warmth into his palms and listening to the crackle of the fire. The silence was thick, but he had come to like it. He had grown used to losing the days in his thoughts, remembering moments from his youth and laughing softly at things that now seemed unimportant. That night, however, something tugged at his mind, a strange feeling that he could not place. It was as though someone had spoken his name without speaking it at all, as though a memory had knocked on the inside of his skull, asking to be let out. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the image of that gold nugget resurfaced, gleaming against the red dust, heavy in his hand, a small fortune he had chosen to walk away from. He remembered the Apache elder who had watched him in silence that day, his dark eyes sharp with knowledge. That moment had never fully left him, and he found himself wondering what had become of that man, of his people, of the land he had quietly honored and then left behind. The thought stayed with him long after he crawled into bed, weaving itself into his dreams. Morning brought frost thick on the windows, a reminder of how unforgiving the high plains could be. He made his usual coffee, fed his horse, and tried to brush off the strange heaviness that followed him since the night before. Yet even as he worked through the hours, he felt watched, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a way that made him feel remembered. It was the first time he had ever felt such a thing. By midday, he saw dust rising on the horizon. At first, he thought it was cattle wandering too far again, but as the shape grew clearer, he recognized riders, 3 of them, moving slow and purposeful. His hand lingered near his rifle out of habit, not fear. Strangers were rare this far from town, and rarer still were those who rode directly to his home. As they approached, he felt his heart stir with something between surprise and curiosity. The riders were Apache. Their horses moved in unison, and their faces held a calm solemnity, neither threatening nor uncertain. They sat tall, dressed traditionally, adorned with details that spoke of lineage and purpose. The cowboy stood on his porch, hat in hand, suddenly feeling like a much younger man, facing a moment he did not understand. When they stopped a few yards from him, the tallest dismounted first. He was older, though still younger than the elder the cowboy had met long.
The years that followed the cowboy's unexpected act of restraint and honor settled into his memory with the quiet permanence of something unfinished. Life moved forward around him in steady, predictable lines, but the moment he chose to leave the gold where it lay, untouched on Apache land, lingered in the back of his mind like a story that had never been fully told. He did not speak of it often, not because it embarrassed him or because he doubted his choice, but because it felt like something belonging to a different world, one he'd stepped into only briefly and then stepped away from out of respect. People around him would continue to talk of luck, fortune, and opportunity, and he would simply nod, never mentioning the moment he turned his back on more money than he had ever imagined possessing. His ranch remained modest but steady. Some seasons were generous, others punishing, but he learned to value the rhythm more than the reward. Sometimes, when night settled over the fields and the stars scattered across the sky, he remembered the quiet dignity of the Apache elder who had watched him that day with sharp, assessing eyes. There had been a silent exchange between them, one not built from words but from understanding. To the cowboy, that was enough. He never expected anything beyond that moment of shared recognition. 13 years can change nearly everything, yet some truths remain rooted as stubbornly as desert stone. When an Apache delegation eventually arrived at the outskirts of his property, it was not disruption he felt, but an unfamiliar pull of curiosity mixed with a hint of unease. He was older now, more worn at the edges, but his eyes still held the steady calm of a man who had lived close to the land all his life. The riders moved with composed purpose, their presence one of confidence rather than confrontation. The cowboy stepped forward, ready to meet whatever message they carried. The Apache representative spoke with the authority of those who have carried responsibilities longer than most men can comprehend. They told him their people had not forgotten the decision he made more than a decade earlier. They spoke of the significance of that gold, of what it meant culturally, historically, spiritually. It had not been just metal pulled from the earth. It had been a protected piece of their heritage, something sacred, something never meant to leave their land.